Hello everyone, Cosmic Foreigner here. Those amongst you privileged enough to have followed this channel for a longer time are well familiar with some of my old uploads, celebrating the more seedier and perverse aspects of human life. Yes. Now, of course, I've always been aware of the downright destructive aspects of porn, such as the constant need for anal. It's not normal for every goddamn video to have an anal scene, okay? It was supposed to be a special category, but now it's just a norm. So you made it weird, and you ruined it. Not to mention all the plastic, chimichangas. It's certainly hard to find girls that look natural in there, if you know what I mean. There's an in-between here, okay? There's a middle ground here between plastic surgery capless cum bucket and socialist 70s bush, which I would like to call reality, which is something that you rarely find represented in the world of pornography. And it can certainly eschew certain people's idea of what's healthy sexuality when they don't have any positive sexual inspirations in life, in the form of teachers and adults, parents, who can have that birds and bees talk without too much cringe. The absence of healthy inspirations leaves a void where porn becomes a destructive substitute. And it's alarming how often convicted rapists will recount their version of the event, the crime that took place, as a porn narrative. There's a very good book about this I would like to recommend to Swedish readers. Link in bio. Now, when I went to school, we had a couple of suits from some awareness institute visit the class and tell us that you start sweating during puberty. They also made a very weird drawing on a whiteboard and said, "This is what a woman looks like lying down." Basically, it's not too much of an overstatement to say that hentai taught me more about human sexuality than any Swedish school system. And I can certainly hope that things are a lot better today, but since I keep hearing about people doing anal when they're 13, maybe optimism is kind of overrated as a concept. And I don't mean to be a Slavic stereotype here, okay? I just find a lot of room for improvement in the human world. Us here in the West are now caught in this weird in-between of Christian residual purity complex, making sexual education not so effective, and Vice articles telling us about how it's okay to suck your girlfriend's dick. I want you to taste that sentence for a second there. And also about, like, doing double anal in college. I feel like promiscuity is kind of celebrated as an ideal in media nowadays, falsely advertised as empowerment. Porn went from this kind of fringe movement to becoming part of the mainstream and has now combined with media, essentially defining our culture today through the impact it has on our beauty standards. People are bleaching their assholes in record amounts here, so don't tell me I'm wrong about this, okay? Just look at music videos nowadays that anyone, even young people, can find openly on YouTube, and you'll discover they're not really that much different from actual porn. Just trust me on this, okay? I've done the research for you. Today's cultural beauty icons behave as porn stars, getting famous by taking their clothes off, and when you look at media as a whole, the message to young women is give it up. Don't put a ring on it. Don't be a slave to traditional ideas. At the same time, white men are constantly told that we're evil just by the virtue of existing, which apparently is maintaining an invisible system of cis male oppression. We're living in an era where trying to pick someone up has become defined as sexual harassment. Unless the guy is attractive, of course. And as a male citizen of a progressive society, I can expect to have articles peddled to me about how men smiling could be sexism. Male sexuality is under attack, whereas female sexuality has become abstractified to the point of confusion. Empowerment sometimes has a pretty perverse meaning, and it leaves many hurt and hollow, which I will get into more later. First, I will speak more of myself. When you live in a puritanically constipated, progressive feminist society, the tendency is to lash out against the general aura of their censorship, rather than focusing on nuance and offering a better worldview than what you oppose. This is otherwise known as edgelord syndrome, or being a contrarian. You react to the mainstream that isolates you, but the downside to that tactic is that inadvertently it can send out a shitty one-sided message. Because when you're only arguing in opposition, you rarely find time to advocate what you fully think, including the kind of stuff you think that everyone already kind of takes for granted. And yet nothing is really given in life. So I'd like to give a more nuanced, whole-sided view on porn here, which I've developed over time. Some of my older videos on the topic are a bit too trolly, and I like to make a more serious argumentation here today. Now stick with me to the end here, and we're gonna get off. Given the data on porn consumption and erectile dysfunction, you can look forward to a future of floppy dick if you don't finish this video. So trust me here, you're gonna watch this whole thing, and you're gonna be happy. And anyone recognizing themselves a little bit too much can look in the video description for help. The problem you find in pornography is the same problem you find with media as an idea. Just consider, for example, how Facebook was deliberately engineered to operate like a drug. This pretty much defines how social media companies that we use daily in general affect us today. Deliberate manipulation of your dopamine receptors to make you think that you're being rewarded merely by interacting with the site, clicking likes, and getting into petty arguments. But the bigger issue can be summarized in the phrase, "the medium is the message," coined by tech philosopher Marshall McLuhan in 1964. Essentially, this guy talked about the internet long before the internet and captured many of the lifestyle issues we see with media and technology today. Too often we neglect the very character of media itself. For definition, media is a subjective extension of the person that is producing it, always filtered through the creator's mind and unconscious biases. So for example, pretending there's such a thing as objective journalism really only blinds you from your own biases. Mainstream media is basically a bunch of companies selling you a focus on the bad things in life. You can never attain complete truth by reading a bunch of news articles and watching documentaries. You have to get out there and interact as well. Furthering that notion, think about things like people's social media habits and Facebook jealousy. People who sit and stew over other people having a nicer boat, a nicer vacation, a nicer life. When really, no matter how much emotion and honesty you think you're pouring into your status updates, it's ultimately just gonna be a reduced version of you, a piece of media of you, that doesn't actually say anything about the whole you. Just as little as a media interview or a slander article by the New York Times would tell you anything about what a real celebrity is like as a person. Journalists are editing reality the same way you do with your social media, consciously and unconsciously. You think you're sharing and connecting, but really you're just giving away personal information to creepy companies that hate their users, and uploading a carefully edited portrait of yourself, not even realizing that's what that gallery of happy pictures really is. So nobody actually gets to know the real you, and yet you wonder why you feel so alone by that computer. The point is that this reflects a larger issue with technology and media, because that whole social media mentality where your affirmation depends on chasing likes and retweets has crossed over into sexuality as well, fueled by apps like Tinder. Even there we see the constant chase for dopamine, people only looking for the next kick. So now we have hookup culture, which is essentially people turning each other into porn. They're used to seeing so much of each other and having so many options, they immediately become spoiled with choice, don't learn how to work on relationships, and just cancel out of the dating market because it's too hard, and settle for other modern alternatives instead. So congratulations! By purchasing your smartphone and using it that way, you basically turned yourself into a cyborg cum bucket. A living, breathing, complex individual is reduced to a cheap fix to pull through in hunt for the next pleasure. Although it's better described as a form of self-harm, since that's what it does to you long term. That's the real danger of objectification and objectifying. Ultimately, it really hurts yourself the most because of how it distorts your ability to have social relations that empower you. Porn is therefore every bit anti-male as it is anti-female. So it kind of saddens me how there's no middle ground for this discussion, since it's essentially an issue of our human condition. not politics. And I do insist on self-abuse as a description because a lot of people are commodifying themselves through technology at alarming rates. And when you mix that in with our political climate, you get a lot of confusion and denial about what both men and women want eventually at a later stage in life anyway.
I used to be friends with a chick at Jezebel, and she's at Vice now. She told me that I'm spilling the beans here, but I don't care. She told me that the managing editor, who looks kind of like Jimi Hendrix, but it's a woman, she would cry herself to sleep at night because she waited too long and her ovaries dried up. And I feel like screaming at her, your whole agenda is telling women that they're men and they don't need kids and they'll be fine without kids, and you don't even believe that fucking shit.
Porn and hookup culture essentially institutionalizes the thinking into your mind that something better could come along always. So people end up treating each other like Netflix. There's so many options to choose from, so many succulent features. It's impossible to pick a movie. So all this freedom is really just making you settle for nothing, living in constant anxiety and indecisiveness. When you look over the psychology and data on what's commonly known as porn addiction, I'm not sure that addiction is a good word for it. It doesn't necessarily operate as addiction so much as it distorts and messes with your expectations of reality, intimacy, and the opposite sex. Thus it ends up hurting you indirectly and subconsciously by making you addicted to the idea of shallow satisfaction. And that has a shadow side, because over time it becomes the fertile soil for fear. Porn as a habit has a tendency to make people terrified of feelings and intimacy. That's the real danger. And I don't think that men understand that when they label it addiction. Think of it more like poisoning. You're not jacking off 24/7, so I understand why you don't want to think of yourself as addicted, but you're not exactly exercising a healthy relationship to reality either. It's an addiction in the sense that you're addicted to replacing reality with fantasy. This is also the problem with social media, but when in the context of human sexuality, it makes you think that healthy relationships don't exist just because you have to go through the tumbly ride of getting to know someone. On the other end of that spectrum, romantic comedies can be just as damaging and perverse as porn. They also provide an absurd idealization that doesn't quite match reality, so people end up not knowing what to look for. Joseph Gordon-Levitt's movie Don Juan did an excellent job capturing this. Highly recommend this entertaining yet insightful watch. It really shows how objectification can be done in different ways. Gender-neutral ways. What I'd like feminists to consider with their rhetoric, particularly the more radical ones, is that you're creating an impossible environment for men to truly talk about their feelings. And considering how dangerous it can be with bottled up emotions, I feel like society should be more concerned about that. If men were to express disappointment with how life has treated them, social experiences, women, and just society in general, they're usually told that they're privileged oppressors and potential rapists. Just look at how hard it is to come across a man's shelter, for instance. I have men writing me, telling me that they don't know what to do after they've been raped by a woman. Just think about that. A man who gets raped by a woman and a pack of feminists is the very last group on earth he would ever think to seek out contact with. And that pretty much explains why you're so widely disregarded as a pointless movement of hate. That's something actually inclusive. That's also how feminism can fuel hatred towards women more than porn does, because you're out there claiming to represent all women, and nobody's really doing a lot of arguing against that from the female masses, so all men ever end up seeing when they consume media and build up their reality is a bunch of women that find things wrong with men, and would happily disown them as soon as they express a perspective that mommy matriarch doesn't agree with. Now, I don't mean to be too cheeky here, but when you highly casually research serial killers, a very apparent pattern that pops up is overbearing, strong individual misandrist mothers. You see, a lot of male serial killers have a overbearing, feminist stereotype of a woman for a mother. So if you want to know where all that violence against women is coming from, maybe consider that misandry and misogyny could go hand in hand. I want to see a world where people love instead of fight. And it's just cold, hard scientific logic that if a Nazi and a feminist banged and had a baby together, you would have a Big Bang type of situation where, you know, they kind of merge, collapse, and a centrist will be formed. This is just science, okay? Real Balkan physics. So make love, not war. Take it from the war refugee, and make sure to share this video if I've gotten you off. Until next time, this is your friendly neighborhood foreigner.